All right, so this is related to some recent videos that I did, and I'm tying in some ideas, and I'm also sharing my thought process so you can see how the ideas are being birthed. But I wanted to lean a little bit back on. I had made a video. It had some traction compared to the other videos on this called Videi, and that was a few months back where beginning to enunciate that I had I was getting onto a motorcycle where I live, and I gave a woman like a pop quiz, like I said, how you living, Biggie Smalls? And I was gonna see if she knew the rest of that lyric, but she did not. But then she was saying that she had just been engrossed with a series about P Diddy, and then that launched me into a video talking about how it's significant that she and likely a lot of people would be engrossed, fascinated with the series of P Diddy. And then I had also mentioned that video that when I first became a professional school bus driver in 22, my first role in I had won that license in the summer of 22. I began as a short bus driver in for summer school in 22, but then I had a over yonder assignment with it's the same company but an assignment out of town in the next state over in the middle of that state in Milwaukee. It was my first assignment as a big school bus driver, and that actually where I was at, I think it was a school called it was near Tetonia. It was like a one of your northern schools, like a school in the I think it might have been called North something, like North Branch. And they were when they didn't tell me when I got that assignment when I was left. This brother that trained me, and he's like, you didn't know you had been in the trenches that time. But actually, those students, they were very like sometimes I've served different demographics. I've served like inner city, but then also like gentrified suburbs that also have similar student members as the inner city, because the gentrification is a function of being from the inner city. And some of those students, they're more savvy and graceful and actually mature than a lot of their counterparts. You would think that a lot of people, they say that like, oh man, these kids are so bad, like the kids from the inner city are so bad. But actually sometimes the suburbs, they have more of a chip on the shoulder and they get into more mischief, and they actually have the money to get into more mischief, so they can get into wickeder stuff in the suburbs, but also sometimes useless stuff in the suburbs for the hell of it. But some of the students in the inner city, they already know what that bullshit is about, and they're actually having like graces and savvy, and they can see what some of life is about at a younger age, both among their peers and anyone. They can see what things are about younger. So some of these students that I had in Milwaukee, they were very graceful and sweet, but also just they were seasoned at a young age, and they were a pleasure to serve. So I just want to say that. But I had been in Milwaukee like that. My first, as that's how I started as a school bus driver. But then that same fall, when I came back to where I was at, I there's a series that proliferated about Jeffrey Dahmer's, and I think that the actual family of some of his victims, they had some objections to that film. I can understand why they would have those objections, because I think that one is that even if it were strictly historical, which you actually can't make some, I think that you may not actually be able. So people say like fiction, documentary, uh, uh, um, fiction or documentary, historical documentary, you may not actually be able to make anything a film outside of fiction, just because there's more than one. Even if you were to document something happening, that vantage point is limited. So there's something that got left out of that story. You saw what took place there, but you didn't know what led up to that or all the angles of that. I had a school bus, a safety official from a school bus company. All out of your school buses, they're heavily surveilled, like with surveillance apparatus, like very finely tuned microphones and cameras. But this real actual safety person, I was in a car with him because he was training me on a new route. He's like, look at this on my phone. I can see all these other drivers on my phone. I can see what's going on right here on my phone, just like that. See him up there? That's him right there on the phone. But he was saying that the camera only tells so much of the story, even as sophisticated as that's what that man told me. So even if you had a surveillance of an incident, that camera only tells so much of that story, no less than what led into that story or came from that story. But even if you were trying to do like a rendition of something heinous like what Jeffrey Dahmer did upon people, the you would have to do some embellishment to that. So, but one is that it may be trifling and injuring to the family members to relive that, reenact that historically, with and without the discrepancies that would be in a historical rendition. But then also a lot of that is glorifying it. That's what I meant to say. They were glorifying Jeffrey Dahmer with that series. I have family members and they have friends that they're all about these like these wicked like killer type stuff, and but it's actually glorifying it. And you could say that that's infamy. So Jeffrey Dahmer is not famous; he's infamous, and infamous has even more pull and more sex appeal sometimes than fame, if anything. So this country exactly celebrates, but specifically and certainly, just like there's a difference in how crimes are prosecuted, there's also a difference in how crimes are celebrated based on the stature and identity and means mode of operating of a killer. And Jeffrey Dahmer is a good example of that. Is that I think that he's celebrated for victimizing, murdering men of color, gay men, and also children. When you so my I know people that celebrate Jeffrey Dahmer, and they're interested enough to spend their time watching something like that. But then they would have this and that to say about like R. Kelly. So they'd probably have a different standpoint about R. Kelly or I think P. Diddy was cleared. I don't know what the current status of the P. Diddy trial, but they would have a different viewpoint and standpoint upon, or different appreciation or revere for R. Kelly, R. Kelly, P. Diddy, and Jeffrey Dahmer. And so you can reveal that just by asking a question. Like, so a lot of people, they'd say that, okay, so if you went to prison with some bad paperwork, you were victimizing children, you would have hell to pay for that in prison. And actually, Jeffrey Dahmer did have hell to pay for that. I have to say that he did meet his consequences in prison. But just as people appreciate him and understand that name, both civilians and people who are incarcerated, I don't think people have the same contempt for Jeffrey Dahmer, both civilian and some people that are incarcerated, as a normal person who has victimized children. They look at him as a killer, a serial killer, but not necessarily a victimizer of children. So I asked like a family member, so how do you think about it that, so Jeffrey, they're like, I was like, so we got on the subject of Jeffrey Dahmer. Said, man, Jeffrey Dahmer is a whole nother animal of himself, but actually like with something of respect. So I said, so what do you think about the fact that children were among his victims? And also that some of those children actually escaped, and they were returned to him by law enforcement to finish victimizing them and actually murder them, based on the sway and the appeal and the believability of his stature and privilege, and just his believability as a white male at that time in like the late 80s, early 90s. You could actually be in the process of victimizing a child in the most heinous of ways. That a child escaped while also being drugged, being returned while being drugged to finish being victimized, because of the believability of white privilege, of a white male is believable. Then my family member said, or someone said that, oh yeah, well that's because that person was gay, and back in that time they thought that gay was icky, so there wasn't a big deal about that because he was gay and icky back then. So that just actually shows the cognitive dissonance in our value in the United States, is that, and I don't mean to be vulgar with this or flippant in referencing loosely victimization of children or gay people or men or anyone. I don't mean to, or what P. Diddy or R. Kelly were accused of. I don't mean to be flippant with that, but I'm just simply pointing out that there's a discrepancy in how crime is prosecuted, how crime is understood, and also how it is revered and responded to, both the backlash but also the infamy and the rock star effect of even crime. And so I think that comes down to a deeper appreciation of status, so that Jeffrey Dahmer was a white male victimizing men of color, and gay men, and to a certain extent minors at that time, was not completely different than the actual values of the society. So back in, you can imagine back in that time, the 80s, 90s, this many umpteen men were being victimized systematically, but also individually within that systematic victimization. Men of color were losing their lives. They were being undermined. They were being sabotaged. They were being targeted. They were being engaged. They were being dispatched. Men were. Men of color were. Gay men were. Gay men of color were. And to some degrees, children of all those demographics were. Because like just an example of that would be like someone that's in the street life. Different people in the street life that were still minors in that time, the 80s, early 90s, they could be victimized by the extension of the policy. So this different policy gutted, uprooted the black community, introduced drugs. The drugs ratcheted up, exacerbated drugs and street life, and that amount to victimization of minors and adults and minors as a systematic, intentional thing by people who were actually educated and statured, putting some of this into play. For what I'm talking about, there's an excellent, eminent author named Dr. Wesley Muhammad. Some of the thoroughgoing scholarship and research that you may come across in a book that's available for commercial purchase. He has a book called The Pot Plot, and he has another book about like the war on black males. I think he has like two versions of that. In both those books, he talks about actually what led into the crack epidemic. Some of it, there's a lot of it. I won't cite the institutions, but some of your educational institutions exactly in Southern California, where the crack epidemic was appreciated to proliferate, and then the further detriment that we're still dealing with, because that affected street life, street politics, and then those reverberations are still with us now. So some of the dynamics that we have that would have someone accost me out of a vehicle, accost another person that I saw in a YouTube video, like to question his allegiance. That's not outside of the experience of the black community around the crack era, and some of the heritage of that is from that era. Now, I think that we've always had tribalism as men, and we've also, any group of human beings has a need for male labor, but also male militancy, and African black people, black culture is influential the world over, for better and for worse. But part of our culture as black American Africans, but just black people in general, is the militancy, but also some of like the style in music, in appearance, in all manners. You can't separate any of that, because that's what we are. So the militancy, the tribalism, the affiliating, the presentation of style, the ornamenting of color and appearance, and symbols of association. That's what it is to be human, and also to be American African and human. So I'm not saying that stuff is bad in itself or wrong in itself, because like the European society, this Western society, they put a lot of resources into killing other people, as a group. Militancy as a group. You sometimes you think that oh, so yeah, my son's going off to the military. You wouldn't say, oh yeah, my son's going off to join a gang. It's a well organized gang. They're gonna train him over there in California, and then he's gonna go to this place, and then he's gonna get into a lot of hell with people, and some people are probably gonna come up dead from that on his side and their side. But that's what he's going to do. But you wouldn't appreciate that with the military. But the military is still actually gang activity, the military, but it's more well organized. Not, I can say it's more well organized, but it's more, there's more resources that go into it on the surface that are designated, that you can see, that go into the military. But it's still like that. So you can say that it's not unique that you would have gangs either in Western formal society, military, or what you're calling street. But the attitudes and the way that a society would appreciate those groups and engage them is different. But some of the negative aspects of that, because I'm not saying all those aspects are negative, but the negative aspects of it, as it has been experienced in the black community and the United States, it has to do with some of the dynamics around the crack era. The dynamics around the crack era have to do with different modes of engaging substance that were proliferating around South America, like the different ways that, so cocaine is deeply part of South American history and culture and medicine and life, is cocaine like that. But they had different ways of curating and engaging it. According to Dr. Wesley Muhammad, one of it was that they would have like these cocaine cigarettes, like around the time of like somewhere the early to mid 20th century, they had these cocaine cigarettes. They were very potent, and they could be very addictive. People would sell their backside to get a taste of these cocaine cigarettes like that, very potent like that. I think it might have been like I think there was a scientist, according to him, there was like a German scientist. So the coca leaf is one thing, to chew it as medicine, as a stimulant, that's one thing. It's part of South American culture and history, ancient times. But it's also beneficial and maybe enjoyable and healthy to some degree just to have the leaf like that. But then there was a scientist, according to Dr. Wesley Muhammad from Germany, I think, and he landed there in South America. But he studied cocaine. He distilled it, and he made it from the coca leaf to like what you have is cocaine, like hard cocaine. Hard cocaine is not what you have in nature. It's an actual. It's a that's a scientific. It's like it's amplified. It's potent because of this scientist. Like I think it's like the 1800s. A chemist did that, but then that further went. That there were some further additions to that in the 20th century, such as you would have like these cocaine cigarettes. Then you had interest from the United States, like some of your three letter organizations, and some of their revolving door between like with education. Like I mentioned in another video, some of your prominent schools in Southern California were responsible for collaborating with their science, the three letter organizations, and that cocaine it got formulated into crack cocaine and exactly used as a weapon against the black community. And effectively, do you have social engineering, chemical engineering, military interests, parallel military interests, educational interests, probably corporate interests, all converge exactly upon the black community, no less than affecting men of color, gay men of color, and some minors within all that. That's not to speak of AIDS, which AIDS also came on the scene exactly that same time, the 80s, the crack epidemic and the AIDS epidemic both affected exactly men of color, gay men, the black community, also gay men who are not of color but gay men, and then also African societies after that in Africa, also black Africans. So Africans, African Americans, gays, gay African Americans, and maybe also gay Africans were among the decimated classes with these sophisticated, potent, weaponized atrocities on a grand scale, wholesale mayhem, murder, gentrification, eugenics, and maybe a little bit of euthanasia. Because some of those some parts of those lifestyles, it's like offering a person a better means of harming themselves, but some of their participation is necessary. Like with crack cocaine, is that your participation is necessary to some degree at first. So from that standpoint, it could be collective euthanasia, with a profit incentive and social engineering and a political objective. That's very horrible, because the worst thing you can be hurt by is yourself. So you help someone to hurt themselves is that's the deepest violence there. But that Jeffrey Dahmer would do that at that time, it's not actually different than the actual the broader values and trends and motion of the society, and the entire society would have to stamp that and tolerate that directly or indirectly for that to occur on a grand scale like that, so that the society would tolerate the crack epidemic being dropped off to the black community, the AIDS epidemic being dropped off to the gay community and minorities and gay minorities. That's not different than tolerating Jeffrey Dahmer for what he did, even as that somewhat spilled over into minors. He wasn't only attacking minors, but he did attack a minor. You bring that up to someone who is invested in the status quo and somewhat reveres a figure like Jeffrey Dahmer, and you've just made cognitive dissonance right there, because they hadn't thought that much, or they're not in a position to embrace what that means, is that this society actually celebrates that kind of stuff. But you can see the redundancy and the contradiction in the society and in someone that would appreciate someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, in that, yeah, it's cool to be a killer. It's cool to kill gay people. It's cool to kill men and men of color. But he just killed a kid there. Is that cool? So, but what I meant to say is that the reason I bring this up, and I wanted to juxtapose Jeffrey Dahmer, P. Diddy, and R. Kelly is because it's actually significant there, because it's like, so I actually haven't, so, and this is a little bit like similar like with the military, right? So you take the military, right, in the United States. Sometimes you see like members of like the military, like special members of the military. These people are intelligent, savvy. They might not necessarily have gotten into a lot of trouble in their life. So they're a healthy, competent, agile, motivated, organized, a subsidized, lethal killer is their job. Is like a mercenary, a very sophisticated mercenary. Without you wouldn't appreciate some of your military people as pirates, but it's actually like a form of being a pirate, but actually an intelligent. So like your law enforcement, they're like organized professional criminals. That's what it actually take to challenge criminals. It'd take another criminal. For the military, they're like mercenaries in that is that. So you got into this line of work. You didn't necessarily have a lot of problems in life or problems with other people from abroad, or be forced to take up that line of work, but you were interested in taking up that line of work. You were good at that line of work, and you end up killing a lot of people. That'd be very scary to go up against these well-trained, well put together, sober, measured, organized, subsidized, lethal, motivated killers. That'd be horrible. But why did you kill someone? They say this is how many bad guys got killed. So they got paid to kill bad guys. I want to point that out. Bad guys. So in this life, right? So everyone has to eat. Therefore, something has to get eaten. Ostensibly, it's okay to eat plants, not all plants, but plants, the ones that don't have certain benefits or detriments. So when we don't let people consume certain plants, is it because of the detriment only, or also because of the benefit? And can you isolate the detriment from the benefit if there is detriment and benefit? But you have these other certain plants that you also introduce as pharmaceuticals. You likely can't take out, if they have a benefit, they would have to have a detriment, because things are connected like that. They say, but there are certain side effects. That's exactly because there's a detriment with anything you would do or consume or be. But some are tolerated, some are not. Some are profitable, some are not. Some are beneficial, some are not. Some are detrimental, some are not. But which ones actually are available to us as civilians? So you actually can't consume any plant you would want to. You can't consume any animal you'd want to. There's like protections on certain animals, but not all animals. And some of them, there can be appreciated to be health benefits by certain animals that are protected. And that's largely probably good. I'm not advocating for injuring protected classes of animals. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just simply showing that it's okay to curate and consume some animals, and it's not okay to curate and consume other animals. Some other animals that it's not okay to curate and consume, their bodies actually do have medicinal properties and nutritional properties that would surpass that of what's available to ordinary people, such as why they may be protected because they may be poached like that, or there may be a profit incentive for curating them that would skew the actual balances that allow them to be viable as a species, and they may go extinct if they're over consumed and over poached because of the viability and value of their bodies. So I want to point that out. But just the fact that there are plants that it's okay to consume, that it's not okay to consume. There are classes of animals that it is okay to consume and not to consume. You may say maybe insects also, but I don't know of protected classes of insects. And then they say that there's also a motion to potentially put human beings back into a staple of insects. And that actually shows you how some of our notions around consumption are arbitrary, and they sway, they come in and out of vogue, both plants, but also like maybe animals also, where they had like something like called reefer madness so sometimes alcohol was legal, it was prohibited, it was legal again. Marijuana was legal, it was prohibited, and it was legal again. So it comes in and out of vogue like that. But also assailing, victimizing, profiting from other human beings is legal, illegal, and legal like that. You could say slavery, you could say wage slavery, you could say indentured servitude, you could say sharecropping, you could say medical testing, you could say military conscription. You could say social engineering, as it injures human beings, but also there's profit with that. These are all different ways of accessing, but also accessing the value of human beings, but also victimizing human beings. It's tolerated differently in consuming human beings. It's tolerated differently, and it goes over differently as it comes in and out of vogue. But what does make it tolerated or not, in vogue or not, is the way that stature is. And also you had victimization of children going back too, because you didn't have protections around labor. So people were being, you had horrible atrocities in the Industrial Revolution around labor. Like you had long working hours, no weekends themselves as we have them. They came from protections around workers, but most protections they get, people find a way around them. So our society is becoming such now with inflation that you have to get 1 and 2 jobs, and you also have to work on the weekend to be viable. I worked for many hellified years with nothing. I didn't know what the hell a weekend was, and a lot of times I haven't been in a position to enjoy weekends. But it's just an example of how whatever protections there are, they'll find a way to get over on that. But they did give us the protection once of weekends. But I think it's likely because of the demands and the competition of earning income, they can get your ass to work on a weekend just like you did in the past, and there's not much you got to say about it like in the past. But you ostensibly have a choice, but there's not much you have to say about it as the practicality of it goes. But you had victimization of human beings around labor, but also children, child labor for a long time. But what actually does give us whatever protection we do have in a system where plants are nutritional, medicinal, viable, profitable, you have parameters about how they may be accessed and engaged and curated and profited from and enjoyed or used as a detriment. You have restrictions around that. For animals, you have the same. Some animals, their bodies can be used for medicinal purposes, for nutrition purposes, and their bodies can actually be used as a drug the same way as a drug would. Like for example, like frogs are like that. There's certain frogs in Mexico where they excrete a substance that's more potent than some things, like it rivals like heroin and cocaine and stuff like that. Is that these frogs, they can affect a person like that. If a person knows how to curate the enzymes in the different substances they secrete, especially when they're around mating. I watched a documentary on Vice, the Vice channel, about that, and one of the proponents of that substance of those frogs and partaking of that was the renowned Mike Tyson. He had made some public statements about experiencing that, and that it was very beautiful for him. So I'm not saying it's good or bad. Some people would say it's very beautiful. And on that Vice, they actually showed a man consume that substance, and you could tell that he was having a profound experience, maybe an experience of beauty. But things have a dark and a light, so there could be a detriment with that too. But I just want to say that animals, they can be used medicinally, like drugs, and also for consumption, like for nutrition. But there's parameters about how they may and may not be accessed for those purposes. Human beings are the same way. A human being, their energy, their labor, that is, their stature in a social matrix that can be redeemed for value. Their and then their body itself can be used as a drug and also as nutrition, because some of, like, just like, so you can amp up and curate plant substances to a medicinal effect, to a nutrition effect, to a psychological effect. You can amp up plants like that. You can do the same with animals, and you can also do the same with human beings. There are different ways of accessing a human body, both an adult and a child, but differently an adult and a child. That some of the substances and the properties of a human body, it can be used for health benefits, maybe for psychological effect, like within like plants. But then also like the labor and the energy and the stature of that, like in terms of redeeming a person's stature for labor or for a clout, that there's value in that too. So a human being can be victimized but also utilized the same as a plant or an animal. And then some, I think for R. Kelly and P. Diddy, they were cited as potentially accessing or taking advantage of another person. I think with P. Diddy, it had been an adult and maybe questionably a minor, but with R. Kelly, it had been a lot with minors. They're victimizing and accessing their sexual energy viability. That is, they're harnessing their sexuality to maybe their enjoyment or their relish or their vanity. But that can also amount to stature that's redeemable. That's it can amount to stature, social graces, and mannerisms that are redeemable in a society where value is this sophisticated, or just their enjoyment. But they still victimize those other people in their bodies. But then with Jeffrey Dahmer, he was doing things where he was victimizing these people's bodies, one for clout, because he did get clout from that. Some while he was living, but also in his death, he still got infamy and clout from that. But then he also, you may say he may have got some nutritional value from that because he was consuming them. Then he was also maybe doing some, we don't actually know all of what he was doing with their bodies. He may have been doing some of that stuff what I was talking about, where you can actually curate some of the potence and the value medicinally, psychologically, and nutritionally of a human body with different sophisticated techniques that may not be known to a public. That author, Dr. Wesley Muhammad, who talked about how the crack epidemic was scientifically engineered and steered toward the Black community. He also talks about some of the value that can be redeemed from human bodies, the actual energy contained within a human body. Felling a human body, killing a human body, it releases profound energy that can be harnessed in different ways. Some of it psychologically, almost a little bit spiritually or symbolically, but some of it also like scientifically, medicinally, nutritionally. There's a deep history in the United States of victimizing Black male bodies, but also harnessing the energy of it. And some of your history around like barbecue in the past, what would attend a barbecue, like for example, enjoying a picnic or barbecue at a lynching, but then also actually consuming the flesh of human beings, also garnering the energy that's released by untimely felling a human being, where we have certain purpose. Our body exists within cycles, dynamic cycles, and these cycles, they play into our development as a human being. So if you say that this person is this old, it's appropriate for this person to experience this, to know this, to do this based on their age. What's more significant than their designated legal age is the actual cycle that they're within, in the rhythm of their body. Because we develop in rhythms and cycles, not necessarily or only linear time as it progresses, but we exist within cycles, and these cycles have a destiny, for lack of a better word, or human life is in the process of sustaining itself as to live fully, which is beyond what we would say, like say passing away at a young age or prematurely. So to cease those cycles of a human body, it releases profound energy. Some of it we can appreciate scientifically, some we cannot. But a lot of it we can feel both scientifically and not. And that's some of what has been a theme or trend about assailing Black males historically, is not just that they got around to doing something wrong, but that there's actually something to be gained for heinously and untimely killing Black people, Black males in the United States, other people too, but in the United States also Black males. And Dr. Wesley Muhammad points that out. But what Jeffrey Dahmer may have been doing, may have been actually harnessing some of the energy that's released by killing a person untimely. In his interviews, he said that he did it because he wanted to be connected to them. He wanted them with him. So therefore, he wanted their actual their dismembered body parts. But one thing he also said was that he was attempting to make to fashion some form of an altar, like with their remains. That's probably truer, is what he was doing there, is because that's an example of what I meant, is that when you fell a person, there's sophisticated energy that's released, and it can be garnered and tapped and accessed. Some of it's symbolic, but it amount to like you're actually spiritual. So he was so atrocious that he was attempting to injure them and benefit from them spiritually, as in symbolically, as in making an altar, but that's still accessing and garnering the energy and potence, or just their stature, the idea of them. He's harnessing energy by mocking and overcoming and conquering the idea of someone. So these are his conquered, decimated, desiccated remains of his conquered victims. And and some of the appeal maybe, or the potence in his conquering, because there's something of vanity to be gained in conquering someone or something, to be able to do so based on your stature, based on deception, but also just based on privilege. That's actually the highest expression of privilege, is that he was able to locate, engage, coerce, deprive of life, disabuse of their life, and then further get away with all that, such as to fashion an altar and be free to fashion an altar based on his privilege as a white male, his standing as a white male, his believability as a white male, is what he was about, and what a lot of people celebrate him for, maybe low key, and that's more of a potent celebration, is when it's low key like that, but it's understood and felt and stamped by a group, such as to spend a lot of time, resource making a series like the Jeffrey Dahmer series, but also to spend time and research watching that, because it's not free to sit on your backside and watch television. To have the television, or to have the place to watch it, or to have the time to watch it, none of that's free. Time is money. So you just gave Jeffrey Dahmer money by watching that. So that might be distasteful to the survivors of some of his victims. But I want to say that the only reason I reference him and P. Diddy and R. Kelly is because what's significant about all of them is that in this life, so if plants, animals, and human beings can potentially be accessed and overcome, victimized, or dispossessed of their inheritance and opportunity to live and standing on this life to a profit, that means that everybody is potentially in jeopardy of being victimized. That's probably always been the case of human beings long before America. There's always a potential to be victimized by other people, by the environment, but especially other people. What actually protects us from other people, more so than law enforcement, than cowboys, than mercenaries, than technology, than tools? What protects us, the one from the other, is stature. You can do this to that one, but if you do this to my one, you're getting fucked up for that. That's the standpoint of a lot of things. So a lot of people, they will engage a different person differently, and it's actually tolerated differently based on your stature. So you just went across the world and you killed this many people. How are you still free? How did you get to do that? How do you live with yourself for doing that? It's because they were called a bad guy. So when they say we killed this many bad guys, it's important for them, and also for you hearing them, that they say bad guy. Because if they said we killed this many people, we killed this many humans, we killed this many dads, we killed this many sons, we killed this many friends, we killed this many brothers, we killed this many mentors, that sounds different. That comes off different. But we killed this many bad guys. So they say that, I read a book back in the day that said that it's in all iterations of war, in human atrocities, that is homicide. Homo means human, like Homo sapien, human. So homicide means kill. So sua means self. Hama means homo. Fratra means brother. Patra means father. You introduce any of those, and then the word side, it means kill. So homicide, it requires a little bit of a dehumanizing thing, because it's very difficult for us as humans. We even though we have and will and have likely always had killed other human beings, because we actually have to love other human beings to create human beings, and cooperate with other human beings to love human beings and also kill human beings. We have a little bit of a necessity to look at human beings differently than an outright foe. You can't somehow compartmentalize viewing human beings as nothing but killable, because then you would actually look at yourself like that, and that may be what happens to people. But I think that the fact that we are both a carnivore and an omnivore. I talked to a person in a gas station, and he was saying that he thinks that the reason that we're a carnivore and an omnivore is because of the demands of an environment where they say human beings were hunter gatherers. That might be deeper than it sounds on the surface. There may be a necessity to be both a hunter and a gatherer based on the seasons, because as winter and summer go across, there's a different opportunity for food sources, but also food is stored different. Plants and meat is stored different. So you may have to have some form of a combination of plant gathering, like medicine, food, supplementing the diet with plant, because it may not be possible to exist only on meat, to have enough meat only to eat. But then also some of the plants may not be viable in winter with the storing methods, or the meat may run out in winter. So you would have a different necessity for accessing plant and meat sources, but also viability for storing plant and meat sources, and also mitigated by the changing of the animal patterns based on the weather patterns, and the plant crops or planting based on the weather. So there's a necessity for us to be omnivores and carnivores. I think that because we're both omnivore and omnivore. I'm not advocating eating communist. That's a new one, comnivore. I'm not advocating that it's better or worse carnivore or omnivore, or no. So we're omnivore. That means we're both carnivore and herbivore, to be specific. So eating plants is herbivore. Eating plants is carnivore. Doing both, going back and between, is omnivore. Omni means all, like as in omnipotence, omniscience, omnipotent, omnivore. But I think that because of that, it actually allows some of our social graces, because if you look at the way that other, like say a pure predator, right, like a tiger or a lion or a wolf, that's a pure carnivore, they probably actually they actually relate to each other differently. Some of the reason that some animals can't talk, like say a cat can't talk, a dog can't talk. Some of the reason that they may not be able to talk is because that wouldn't be viable for them to socialize like that, as they are pure carnivores like that. They wouldn't tolerate one another actually talking, floating ideas, being intellectual like I am on this camera. A lot of humans wouldn't tolerate me being intellectual in a space like this, even as we have free speech upon the internet. But also specifically a pure carnivore, they may not tolerate each other. So they probably would have different demands for social etiquette and social structure, and also social graces and talents, based on the fact that they are just simply a carnivore, and they can be nothing else, and they will be nothing else. But maybe actually when they get around with humans and domesticated, they probably put plant material in some of that dog food. So maybe they're omnivores too. So maybe from that standpoint, they're going to be talking one day. If they get around humans long enough, they're going to be talking, and then they'll be homeless again like people, because you talk enough and your ass is out of a job and out of a roof. But I think that some of our ability for deception, but also our ability for endearing to one another, it has to do with our social capacity, competence, and graces. That is part of being a omnivore. Is that when I'm talking, like sometimes you may think that I have the ability to be more spiritual or righteous than a pure carnivore, a pure predator, because I can ostensibly eat herbs. And maybe if I did come across like as a really like righteous spiritual person, like if I came on this camera and someone appreciated me as being a righteous type of person, they may in the back of their mind assume or think that I had been something of a vegetarian, or I could likely be convinced to become a vegetarian. I've actually tried vegetarianism in the past, and I had someone convince me. They weren't talking to me, but they said something that convinced me that it may not be healthy for a human being to be a vegetarian, and that's not how, since we had been omnivores. So it may be appropriate to be an herbivore to a degree, but to be completely vegetarian is not actually what we are designated in as a species, is how we exist and how our body functions and defaults to. It may default to being omnivore, which is carnivore and herbivore. In the past, there may have been a demand to be more so herbivore, but to be all the way outright herbivore, it may not be what it is to be a human, which is also to be omnivore and somewhat carnivore for being omnivore, even as and while being herbivore. But I think that that some of our propensity to be herbivore for a phase is that maybe there had not been I don't know if there's been a human being that has been herbivore their entire life, And even if there were likely their parents that they may have given them breast milk, or their genetics wasn't a herbivore their whole life. But that'd be interesting to find out how someone actually fared in terms of health if they had been an herbivore their entire life. But I think that because we can go back and forth like that, it gives us our propensity to be endearing to one another, to trust one another, to be humble to one another. So, oh man, that guy's so humble, man. Man, that is the most humble guy in the world. That is the most nice guy in the world. But does he still eat meat? So is that nice? Is he not still a predator like that? Is he not still dangerous like that? Not dangerous, but does he not still have it in him to rip into a pound of flesh, even as nice as he is like that? So just to say that we can pass off and give ourselves the airs of being kinder because we have the propensity to be both herbivore and omnivore and also carnivore, but also we have the ability to get nasty, lethal, dangerous, violent than any creature as we put our intellect to it by being carnivore. So we have that both. We have the carnivore and the herbivore, and the omnivore makes us dynamic and a little bit of both. And to really be convincing, you need a little bit of both. So for someone to really respect you, I think somehow respect and fear is connected. So if someone stops fearing you, if they have no good reason to fear you, they may also have no good reason to respect you, as nice as you are, as useful as you are, as helpful as you are, as skilled as you are, even as trained as you are. As you give someone no fear, they may have no respect also. So you actually need a little bit of fear, but you also need the humility and the grace that comes from being like appearing nice or trustworthy or like humble. So that I think that I just want to point out that I think that's a lot of what we are, and some of our ability to talk and socialize is from being omnivore like that. But still, but the thing that protects us from one another, that the rules of engagement in any iteration of human living is the stature, the status, the standing. And that, so by dehumanizing a person, one is that it allows a person to engage them as a combatant, because they say that I think in most military campaigns they always have like some derogatory term or like a diminutive. That's like when you say like tiny, like a word that sounds small, but also like a little bit disrespectful. I think small would be diminutive, but as you put like there's a word for that there's a word for when you call someone out of their name, like an affix or a prefix or a suffix, but it's like a derogatory slur that most combat fighting, it attends that, or that attitude of seeing another person as less than human, so as to be comfortable engaging that person as less than human. But in a society like ours, with our history, but also our propensity, there has to be some form of protection, but also our viability as a source of benefit to other people, our stature, but also our labor and resources. You have to have some kind of protection about that, and that's your identity. That's your so in this society, what's very important is identity. But your identity, it gives you your resources, but also makes you subject also, that is vulnerable also. So a lot of life is connected. When things aren't working out, when they say when it rains, it pours. When it glitches, it shuts down. So if there's a problem with your identity in this society, that's a real problem. And all things are leveled against you. All these things. So they say that, oh, make sure you close your doors at night. If you see any strange people, be aware and alert the authorities. And then like you hear like these different cars, like when they close the door, it's like beep beep, so that it can be known that there's an alarm system on there. But that alarm system, it's not for real bad actors, it's for riffraff. Someone that would actually have a need to, or think that it's advantageous to break into a car, is more of a low tier of a criminal. A real criminal is going to F you over in your lifestyle and your finance, and they're probably going to do like some kind of like maneuver to get you to invest in something. They might actually just do it. A real criminal doesn't have to break the law. A real criminal would just sell you they're not going to steal a car from you or the amount of money that it costs to buy a car. They're just going to sell you something that doesn't work. So they just stole the value of a car from you, but they don't have to answer for that. That's a better way to rob someone. And if anything, that's the way everyone get, even with all your car alarm, your bulletproof vest, stuff like that, the real one that's going to F you over is going to be the one that you invite into your midst. The one that, so real criminals don't break in, they're invited in. and then they ethically and legally f you over and get by with your resources and your privilege and your ability to sustain yourself. Then you get injured by that. You suffer from that. You have economic downturn from that. Your physical body suffers from that. You just got assaulted like that on a deep level, more than someone breaking into your car like that. But most people are concerned with riffraff. So when you get marginalized, ostracized by the society as it's connected, you're now on the short end of the stick of the identity game, and you're getting all the bad of this life as it's connected like that. So 1, then 2, then 5, then 10, then 20 things don't work from you. So you may appreciate it as bad luck, but it actually hadn't been luck. It's just actually, it's systematic. It's a bad system, not bad luck. But then if you're on the other side of that's at least like within the borders. But then you go out of the borders, or you're the wrong person in the borders, and now you have this same apparatus against you because there's a problem with your identity. So did you kill the bad guys because they did something bad, or because they were designated a bad guy? So a lot of people do a lot of bad stuff, but you don't kill them and get to kill them. You get to kill some people because they're designated as a bad guy. So there had been a problem with their stature, and this entire beast, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if this entire beast that's still interested in accessing and capitalizing the value of plants, animals, and human beings, whether their stature or labor or whatnot, this entire beast, whatever manner of background or well put together or well educated, this and that background piece of it gets on someone, it's all exactly against a person whose identity is out of this society, that is the bad guy in other cultures. So so I just want to say that. But then also, when you have things like with so anything goes. If you got them, you can afford for it, you can afford it, you can do it. Anything goes as money goes, that is, as stature, because money is just actually stature. That's what money is. It's a sophisticated form of stature, because you can't really hold it or even prove it. You're just entitled to it. So it's stature. But you got enough stature, you can do any wicked thing, even wicked thing than what Jeffrey Dahmer and P. Diddy and R. Kelly are in trouble for. You can do wickeder stuff and get away from it if you got the money, the stature. But it's sophisticated how you get to spend and express the stature. So what Jeffrey Dahmer did is that he got away with that. He had the stature to get away with that. Within this system, he could maneuver with that degree of stature he had. I think he had like a cool little job at a chocolate factory where no one would be none the wiser. So he would have gotten away with that. He even confessed himself he would have been getting away with that for longer. But I think he may have hesitated in being completely brutal with his with some of his victims. But I think he also maintained a relationship with his family. Like, I think they said the night he got arrested, his father had been calling him, and that his father didn't know what kind of lifestyle he was living, but they would have had some kind of relationship. So he was still something of a human being. That might have actually been why he slipped, because even as he was victimizing people, he had enough cognitive dissonance. That is, as much as he was not only a carnivore, but he was a cannibal. But then he also may have had some of the pretensions of being a herbivore and a carnivore, such as to maintain wholesome relationships with his family, that might have actually been what would make him slip up enough to get caught like that. So, but still, with that stature, he could do a lot of damage with that amount of privilege and entitlement and stature, but maybe also savviness within the system that stature would afford him to know, because you exist a certain way, you see things the way things are done or can be done. But then with R. Kelly and P. Diddy, what those men are accused of, and what I think R. Kelly is convicted of, is that they also were able to victimize people. They are tried as having victimized people based on their stature. So for them, that had been money. For Jeffrey Dahmer, that had been his actual socioeconomic appearance as a white male. Some of the remedial capital that he'd have just by having a sturdy job in an apartment, but also his identity within a structure, a matrix structure based on race, privilege, and entitlement. That's the stature he used to victimize people, and that he relished doing that. But then R. Kelly and P. Diddy, they had the musical talent that would amount to stature and the track record of success, but then also some of the financial standing, where they didn't have the exact same privilege as Jeffrey Dahmer from being a white male, but they did have similar stature in terms of money. So some people would say that like the author Tariq Nasheed, like sometimes he'll say tongue in cheek, you have but you have $1 million worth of whiteness. So that privilege that Jeffrey Dahmer had, one could argue if it's redeemable or commensurate with the actual amount of capital and success that R. Kelly and P. Diddy had as men of color. And sometimes what's more, so sometimes like I was watching a a video by another YouTuber. I think his name is Marquette, and he was saying that back in the day, you could juxtapose a black doctor and a white custodian, and the white custodian would think that he's better than the black doctor because he's white, like that. And but that actually might that's a actually clear, poignant example of privilege and stature, because what makes you great as a doctor, that you went through that much school and got to become a doctor, or even if you were a custodian that just had enough to pay for a meal and a roof over your head. What's more significant than you being at the low or high tier of that spectrum is that you are invested in and stamped by, but also believe buy into the status quo, because the status quo is what rules, not any member of the status quo. They say the greatest is not a respecter of persons. I say that imperialism is not a respecter of persons. The status quo is not a respecter of persons. So that you got through this much school, according to King Noble, what you're being appraised for in school and validated for is your ability to comply and conform, more so and far beyond being intelligent. And you are only so intelligent, appreciated as intelligent, so as you can humble your own intelligence and conform. So but it's also not easy. You don't just get to conform like that. You actually get challenged. So you have to work for anything, right? So I think if you went to heaven, you'd have to work in heaven. If you went to hell, you'd have to work for hell. If you went to school, you'd have to work for school. Is that nothing's free? Even conforming is not free. You have to work for this. You have to get on your knees, but you also have to pay for the knee pads to get on your knees to conform like that. That's the stamp. That's the sensation of succeeding in school. I'm not trying to say that people that succeed in school have to do sexual favors or that they should do sexual favors. I'm not saying that, but to deprecate yourself, to humble yourself, to conform, to efface yourself, such as to comply with another person's line of thinking or standpoint, to get on board with that, you actually still have to pay for that. So your entire family has to come out of their pocket for it. You have to come out of your pocket for it. You have to spend time investing in that. You have to be effaced for that, and you have to still have the initiative and standpoint to further invest in that. You have to sell your. I'm not saying you have to sell your soul, but you have to sell your face. You have to efface yourself to win in education. That is the licensing and privileging venue rat race. So you're paying for the license. You're paying for the credentials with your resources, your time, your actual true intellect and creativity, but then also your regurgitating of that information and what you retain of it, and the real skill that's probably a smaller degree of your actual training, the skill that will allow you to operate. You paid for all that with your entire face, maybe not your soul, but to get the resources, somebody may have had to pay for their soul, but you have to at least sell your face for that. But that's what you're appreciated as you're a medical professional. You got this higher or degree, that is, you're this much of a conformist, but that doesn't make you better than a custodian that also conforms, because you're just a different higher tier of privilege of a conformist, but you're respected as, and your potence as, and your standpoint of being validated and privileged in this iteration of society is based on your conformity, is what that is. So it's actually not, it would actually figure that if in the time of the 50s, a custodian thought themselves better than a black doctor, they're, from the standpoint of the status quo, they would be, because the value that, to become a doctor, you have to somewhat efface yourself to the values of the society. The values of the society had been racist in the first point. So that white janitor is already within the value of the society from their standpoint as a white person, but then they also believe in the society and support it as to have a job. So that can amount to and be more redeemable. I'm sorry, it can be, as far as a token of value, it can have more pull than even a black doctor in the time of racism, because the black doctor, their training is from that status quo and is therefore limited by it. But then even whatever skill they have, their demonstrable skill, it's not necessarily more valuable than the entire status quo, because you're going up against the entire status quo. It's not just is your skill does your skill compete with any other member of the status quo? For it to compete with any other member convincingly, it had to compete with the entire status quo. That is, any member of the status quo is actually Agent Smith. So you have to actually go against the entire matrix for anything that you would do to have value in the matrix outside of the value system of the matrix, or the value structure of the matrix. For you to have something that would have value outside of the value structure of the matrix, it wouldn't just have to be greater than any member or iteration of the matrix, but the entire matrix apparatus, as the matrix apparatus is connected. But from that standpoint, the actual redeemable value of Jeffrey Dahmer as a white male that's respected for being a white male, because all white males are not respected for being a white male, but for him to be respected as a white male, a simple white male, that's actually probably more potent than like something fancy. Even like a lot of people, they can't stand something fancy. Like even a president may not necessarily have more pull than a simple person, like a simple. So Jeffrey Dahmer was like a simple white male, but he still used that to injure people. But R. Kelly and P. Diddy, they didn't have that going for them like that, but they did have some of the money and accolade and fanfare. And so when you have these series like this series about all three of those men, what's compelling to people is that one is that they are an exact example of stature being used to victimize people, people being available to be victimized based on their stature, and then how that will be tolerated, the nuance of that, how justice comes upon that. That's actually a very pivotal conversation, because in our society where our only protection and our only access to resources is actually our identity, that is our stature and standing, as it's being, but then some of it too is a little bit arbitrary now, because you have different. So in the past, say some of your stature was from appearing educated, but and some of your graces and your mannerisms would come off as educated, and you may have pull with that. But now education has proliferated. This is the knowledge has proliferated. So knowledge is by and large worthless as supply and demand goes, except for special knowledge, effective knowledge, nuanced, may still have value, but that still proves the rule. The exception proves the rule. So in a system where knowledge has proliferated, knowledge is worthless, but special knowledge is more valuable for being findable within so much sea of knowledge. Therefore, the exception proves the rule. But a lot of knowledge is effectively worthless. A lot of mannerisms and errors of being educated is similarly worthless. But certain graces and etiquette are still convincing. And that might be like what we're searching for. What is class? What is stature? What is consent? What is it appropriate to victimize someone who's conscripted in the military as you're conscripted, and someone who's still a child, but also that child is being courted to join the military? You have a lot of different dynamic stuff like that. And the only thing that in this iteration society that we can agree on as a metric for protecting human beings that is viable is just the age of majority. It's just 18. You can't. So there's different ways of that people who are less than 18 are harmed, like especially like just by an incompetent or compromised guardian, like an alcoholic parent or something. But then the different things that are existing in the community, the dynamics of the community, some of which actually come from think tanks and educated and landed and classed and wealthy people, actually consciously put into effect the policies and the activities that will exactly undermine and turn a community upside down, no less than impacting young people that are not yet adults. But then even adults are victimized differently by some of those same people and some of the cycles. But the only thing that we can really agree on is just that you shouldn't do this to someone that's younger than 18. So when these things are at play like this, is like, so all I'm going to say, the significance of these series of Jeffrey Dahmer, P. Diddy, and R. Kelly is that human beings are vulnerable to other human beings. Human beings are profitable to other human beings. Human beings have propensities, social graces from being an omnivore, but also propensities to harm people by being an omnivore, which the propensities to harm can help, like in righteous service or self-defense, but then the propensities to be endearing can also harm, like in wit and guile and graces and like conning. And so all that is at play. But the only thing that gives us any protection, but also standing and enjoyment, I think, is our stature and our standing, and that's amenable and it's assailable. And some of the people with more of it, they can use more of it to assail others, and they're tolerated and even celebrated for it. But if they make, but it's very nuanced also. So if they overdo it, if they, so that you can say they, that's what they all had in common. They indulged. So R. Kelly, Jeffrey Dahmer, and if it were true, P. Diddy can be appreciated as having got away with assailing other people based on their stature. That's not different than anything else in life, because you go to this job, they start victimizing you, they start injuring your self-esteem, they start giving you labor to do that may not be healthy, the hours, the work that it entails, they're getting over on you, they're taking advantage of you, they're ripping you off. Your life, your livelihood, your lifestyle, your life force, your health, they're ripping you off to different degrees. So you could say that Jeffrey Dahmer, R. Kelly, and P. Diddy may have ripped people off to different degrees, heinous degrees, total degrees, but they rip people off based on their stature and standing. They were able to do that, but they also were able to get away with it, and they likely would have got. And that they did that is not different than anything else you do in life, because the other people are victimizing people the same way, but just maybe to a lesser degree or a more tolerable degree. But they overdid it. They indulged it. They got. It was sick to do, but they got sick with it, and they overdid it. I'm not saying P. Diddy, because I don't think he's been convicted, but as R. Kelly has been convicted and Jeffrey Dahmer has been convicted, is that they injured people with their stature, but they got away with it, and they would have continued to get away with it, or just not got caught for what they had gotten away with until they indulged it and they overdid it. So the problem may not be that they injure people with their stature, but they overdid it, and that challenges the believability and congruence of the entire system of privilege. From that standpoint, they must be prosecuted and made an example, but they're not necessarily different than anyone else getting over on anyone else with that big bank take little bank type of dynamic that this life is. But I think that so that they would be called into question. It's an example for the entire society. But I think that what I meant to say is, like, so you imagine like being with pirates back in the day. So it'd be interesting to find out what were the real politics about the plank with pirates, because I think that in this society where your stature, it can be redeemed, your labor can be redeemed, that may be the